Hi, I'm Reed Peterson, and welcome to Grief Refuge. Thank you for listening today and trusting Grief Refuge as a resource to help you cope with loss and navigate your grief. I'd like to personally welcome you, whether this is your first time listening or if you've heard my voice before. Grief Refuge is about providing you daily support to help you find peace and purpose after experiencing a death-related loss. This podcast was created with the intention to help validate everything that you're going through, to help you take time to reflect, and to help you honor your loved one. Here at Grief Refuge, you'll learn healthy ways to manage grief. You'll also find comfort, hopefulness, and a sense of peace in regards to your loss, as well as finding a way to embrace life and move forward again. Through the stories and conversations shared on this podcast, my intention is to help you work through the heavier, more painful feelings that go hand in hand with grief. Grieving hurts, and it's hard to manage. I'm glad you're here, and I promise to do everything I can to provide the best support to you. Before we begin, I want to mention a couple important points. Because of the depth and the nature of this topic, it may be more beneficial to not multitask while listening. Rather than get the laundry done, rather than do the dishes or clean or who knows what, I invite you to use this time for your self-care and your personal reflection. So please use this time to settle in, to relax, and make space for your grief and those feelings so they can run their course. So if anything, please use this time to mourn your loss. Also, this podcast publishes episodes once or twice a month. So when you're grieving, that's a lot of time in between each episode. And more than likely, you're going to need more resources. So if you're in a place of needing more of this support, then please download the Grief Refuge app. The Grief Refuge app helps provide comfort and support on a daily basis. On the Grief Refuge app, there are daily mini podcasts which all help validate your grief. They also provide tools and perspective for grieving, and they help you sort through the thoughts and the feelings that come up when dealing with loss and grief. So lucky for you, the Grief Refuge app is easy to find. All you have to do is search Grief Refuge on your phone's app store. Then you'll find it and you can download it to get started. All right, well, thank you, and let's move on to today's topic. This new Grief Refuge podcast episode, this is a story and conversation about love, loss, and repair. Repair in a sense of how a person who has a broken heart got the support he needed and was able to put the pieces of his heart back together again. On this podcast episode, I interview Marv Weidner, a grieving spouse who authentically articulates his grief and healing journey. There's so much beauty in this conversation because Marv speaks from his heart, he's honest, and he shares important things that he experienced to aid in his healing. We hope this Grief Refuge podcast episode helps support you on your own grief journey. And I'm going to give you a spoiler alert. There's a bonus to this episode. This is actually part 1 of a 2-part series. In part 2, you'll hear the insights and the reflections from Marv's grief counselor at the time, Carol Goldfain. We'll get to that conversation later, but for now, please enjoy this interview with Marv Weidner. Well, hello, everyone at Grief Refuge community. I'm actually really excited to be here with you this moment because I have two special guests. It's such a unique experience. I've never been asked by the hundreds of interview requests I've ever had in my life. And I'm actually here with Marv and Carol, who have what I guess in the field we would call a client and counselor relationship. But Marv and Carol have done something extraordinary, actually. They've co authored a book together. We're here to learn more about this book. It's called Where the Rocks Sing, a story of love, loss, and learning to live again. And we're going to dive into their journey in this process together. Marv has had an unfortunate event of losing his wife. We're here to honor her, and we're here to hold space for Marv's story. We're here to hold space for Carol's story, and we're here to hold space for you as a listener. So let's begin with you, Marv. I actually want to start with the book. Most people in an interview would say, hey, tell us a bit about yourself. We are going to learn more about you, specifically through, actually, I think the book is about you, correct?
It is. And also, of course, my wife and our story together.
And if you will, please tell us your wife's name.
Sure. Her name was Marty Weidner.
Marty.
Mm-hmm.
Marv, tell me a little bit about, three characteristics of your and Marty's relationship together.
We were together for 19 years, and I would describe it as an extraordinary love affair. We lived with open hearts with each other. We shared everything. We raised children together. We grew a business together. We made an extraordinary life together. And it was really built on living with open hearts with each other and always sharing whatever there was to share.
Thank you. That is extra special. And as someone in the field, I assume that when the news of Marty's cancer came about, I can't imagine what it brought, to the experience for both you and to Marty's, just awareness. Tell us a little bit about the diagnosis.
Sure. Marty had experienced pain in different parts of her body, basically in her bones and her joints. And the doctors really thought it was some form of arthritis or something along that line. It turned out to be a cancer diagnosis that was in its final fourth stage when we finally discovered it. And when we learned it was cancer, it was, of course, devastating. It was like the future went away and the past no longer mattered. It was one of those moments that really defined everything for us. And it was like, our stomachs literally dropped when we heard the news. And we treated it like we had everything else in our lives. And that is, we faced it head on and we named it for what it was and faced it with as much courage as we could muster at the time. It was certainly the most devastating moment of my life.
Yeah. With family members who have died from cancer in my family, and being like kind of a secondary witness, to specifically my mom becoming a caretaker for my stepfather Warren and his diagnosis of multiple myeloma and fighting it for 8 years, and then just letting exhaustion be what gave him permission to let go and I guess stop breathing. He just was so tired and so exhausted. Can you share a little bit about like, the prognosis and, some of the end of life experience in your and Marty's connection?
Happy to. The diagnosis was extraordinary and wholly unexpected. So it all came as a surprise. We were told right away that Marty had over 24 lesions in her brain and had cancer throughout her body. We were told that if she underwent whole brain radiation right away, that she might have a few months to live. Otherwise, she would probably be gone in a month. So one thing about Marty that helps to understand this is that she loved life. She loved every day of life, and she had the most extraordinary way to be present and enjoy and take in, every day as a gift. So she made the decision very early on to fight for every day of life that she could get. So she went through the whole brain radiation, surgeries on both of her hips to stabilize them, and chemotherapy. So it was a full-on fight for life. But we knew at the time, Reed, that the diagnosis was terminal, and we knew that she, in her doctor's words, would die from this disease. We had 9 months together, and we were so grateful to the doctor who discovered the cancer, because without his diagnosis and intervention, we would have perhaps had just a few weeks together. One of the things that I think might be helpful is to describe Marty's feeling about death. She wasn't afraid of death. We both, at the time, and for me still, we don't feel like we needed to be afraid of something that we don't really understand. We don't know really what is death. We don't know what's beyond it. But her fear was that it would surprise her. She was very concerned that it would surprise her and she wouldn't know, it was near. So one of the things that we did toward the end of those wonderful months together was to stay very close in touch with our doctors and nurses, hospice nurses, et cetera, to give us a real sense of how close it was. So, in the last few weeks, we would hold each other and cry and admit and share that it was close. And then when it became imminent, we shared that as well. One of the most wonderful things that happened at the end of her life was that I was able to hold her as she took her last breath, which I'm still very grateful that was part of our experience.
It's powerful. And if you're able to, share a little bit more, I'd love to hear some articulation of like what that meant to you, to hold her as she took her last breath.
Well, the circumstances were that, I had taken care of her 24/7 from the time that we got the diagnosis. We had help, certainly, in the house. She would go to the hospital intermittently for treatments, but we always came home. So during that time, even though we had this extraordinary love affair, it was probably the most intimate time in our relationship. She was a very strong, very independent woman, and she let me take care of her. She would allow me to, lift her into bed, to do all the things that a full-time caretaker does for someone who can't, do what they normally would do. And it was really hard, Reed, to watch her slowly lose her ability to speak, her ability to walk. her ability to play the piano. And as the cancer progressed, she increasingly depended upon me to take care of her. So when the time grew near, we just stayed very physically close to each other. We held each other a lot. I would get up and, fix a meal or, a glass of juice or something, but we physically stayed very close to each other during that time. I had as a grieving spouse, I had the benefit of really experiencing sadness as the dominant emotion during that time, and then through the grief process. I didn't have to deal with regrets or guilt or anger or some of the more complicating emotions that normally come along with grief. So we were both just terribly, terribly sad at the end. She was not conscious, I think, the last 2 or 3 days, but was conscious up until then. So it was really hard. It just broke my heart. And we cried together a lot. It was, as I said, it was a very intimate time. And I think that the closest we were, in those 19 years was during those 9 months. And then the day that she died, I know how she felt, although she couldn't tell me. And for me, it was a time to give her freedom to go. I said to her, even though I know she wasn't apparently conscious, but I'm certain that she was at a deeper level very aware of what was happening. And I was able to say to her, Marty, go on the rest of your journey. You don't have to worry about us. Don't look back. Just go. And I do really think that gave her permission to stop breathing and to go on the rest of her journey. And for me, obviously, still brings up sadness to remember those moments, but it's a sweet sadness. It's not a regretful sadness, or it really isn't even a hurtful sadness. It's a sweet sadness that we shared even that moment together. And just to share one part of that moment is that she always loved it when I hugged her. This is true for our whole relationship. She would bring her hands in under her chest and her arms in front of her with her hands under her chest, and I would hold her. And that's how I was holding her on the bed when she took her last breath.
So Marv, I'm just deeply appreciative and deeply grateful for everything that you're sharing. You mentioned your heart's opening up, and you're coming from a truly authentic space, and it brings so much curiosity to wonder and ponder and hear from you. The person that we're hearing now in this conversation, would you say that it's the same person that was speaking when you first sought the help of a counselor?
In many ways, no. In many ways, I've changed a lot since that time. I mean, when Marty passed away, it was like she was torn from the cells of my body. I mean, we were so close and had been so close for a long time that I was wrenched. I was so deeply hurt and so sad that the time that we asked Carol, actually, it was toward the end of Marty's life that we asked for Carol to help us. And by the time she and I were working together after Marty passed, I was a shadow of my former self, I would say. That there was so much pain and so much sadness and such a strong sense of loss that there were days that all I could do was walk. All I could do was walk or meditate. I was really incapacitated for being able to work, to go out, to socialize with or see friends. I was really in a very, very tough spot, and I would not have recognized myself then as I am now. I could not have foreseen that I would find my way through this and be at a place where I could move forward with my life and embrace and fall back in love with life again. At the time that Marty passed, the amount of sadness that I felt was literally overwhelming. Today, I've moved through countless waves of grief, countless times talking to Carol, countless times getting into nature to refine my grounding. I'm a changed person because of the grief that I went through. I think and hope that I'm more compassionate toward others who have experienced great losses. It's the feeling I have is like, Khalil Gibran talked about tearing holes in your soul. I was really taken down to almost nothing. And through the process of grieving, embracing all those emotions when they come up, facing head on the impermanence of life, including my own. And one of the things I would share along the way is this saying that came from the dojo that we studied in Hawaii for a number of years, is face death at any moment, live life fully at all times. And those two things have really been the balance for me since that time. And I think that I would say that my soul is different. My heart is more open to the world, to other people. And in fact, what I've said and written is that my purpose in life is to live with an open heart. And that comes from not only being with Marty and living that way, but that's also what got me through, the tougher times, the most intense times in the grief process as well.
Marv, it sounds like there was a request by what sounds like both you and Marty that you wanted support from Carol even before Marty died.
That's
Can you tell us
true.
a little bit about that?
Yes. It was a few weeks, perhaps a month before Marty passed, when we realized the incredible losses that we were experiencing. Her ability to speak had been lost a few months before that. Her ability to walk had been lost. Her ability to communicate. There had been so many losses, and it was obvious that she was losing her life and I was losing her. So we reached out to the hospice nurses and asked if there was a grief counselor that we might begin working with. We called Carol, and a couple days later, she came bounding up the front steps of our house and entered our lives. And it was so helpful when Carol came into our lives. She helped us communicate because Marty had no ability to speak. And the only way she could express herself was, facial expressions. She wanted so badly at that time to go to Arizona one more time and spend time with her nieces and nephews, her sisters. And I was really trying, but unsuccessfully, to find out how important that was to Marty. I knew she had wanted to do it. The hospice nurses told me that they doubted that Marty would survive the trip. So I was being really careful to make sure that Marty knew that, and that her decision, her determination, took that into consideration. And though Marty and I had ways of communicating, it was a really poignant time for us to be able to find out what it was she really in her heart wanted to do, even though the risks were quite extraordinary. Carol came into our bedroom, sat down with us, and just within about, an hour, have been able to help Marty find a way to communicate with us. And ultimately, Marty was able to cry, to shed tears at the thought of not being able to go. And she had not been able to cry for months because of the whole brain radiation. So that was the start of Carol's incredible, magical intervention with us. So she helped us through the last part. She was there, um, shortly after Marty passed that day. She was there, embracing our whole family during the service that we held with Marty, and was there through that whole process, and got to know our extended family, our children, and was able to sort of knit together our community, if you will, here in Gunnison, and our respective extended families. And she just embraced all of us in that process. And then she and I began, a counseling and coaching relationship then that lasted for, I guess, in excess of 2 years after that.
It's amazing. Simply amazing. Marv, a lot of times that people work with bereavement and or grief counselors that are hospice related, it actually has, it's not like this in every state, but I know for a fact in the state of California where I live and where I work, it's a 13-month relationship that has ended. And so a lot of people that are grieving, you've identified it as a grieving spouse. A lot of people that are grieving often, have these experiences of quote unquote feeling stuck in their grief. And then people recognizing, hey, wait a minute, year one was pretty much a shit show. Why is year two feel worse? These are some common things that I hear a lot in, the field that I work in. And can you recap a little bit about, year one or year two in the work that you did with Carol?
Sure. The first, I would say, 4 months was basically trauma and crisis and extreme sadness. And during that time, Carol mostly just listened. And she's an extraordinary listener. What I learned from Carol is that if someone is grieving and you're there with them, just be quiet and listen. And I have a less polite way to say that, but just listen, just be quiet and listen. And that's what she did. And the commitment I made, and this was an easy commitment, was to embrace every emotion as it came up. And that was very consistent with the relationship that Marty and I had, because we had a commitment that we wouldn't hold anything back or hold anything in reserve. And we would talk about whatever feelings or experiences we were having. And we'd share that with each other at the time that it was occurring. So what I know about myself and what I learned through this process was that as those feelings would come up, and as I mentioned earlier, it was primarily sadness, right? as those feelings would come up, I never suppressed them. I never tried to delay them. I never tried to defer them. Even if I was with other people, I would excuse myself and say that I need to take a few minutes. The reason I did that was that I knew that if I suppressed that emotion, I may not get another chance to express it. And it would sort of flatten me. It would kind of depress me. It would take so much energy to keep those emotions at bay. And it was like the emotions would stick to me if I didn't express them. So I continuously, through that first 4 months, expressed those emotions. And working with Carol, I realized, of course, that I was really keeping my life, very small. And I realized that I really had to get back out into the world. So with help from my business partners and some very friendly customers, I got back out into consulting. I would tell the customer, if I'm standing up and facilitating strategic planning, they knew, what I had experienced, and they may, in some cases, have known Marty. And I would tell them, if I feel grief coming, I'll just excuse myself and I'll be back in, 20 minutes. And they were all great with that. But what I also realized, and Carol really helped me understand this, that I needed to take some steps to get myself out into the world again. And for me, that meant travel, and that meant also getting out into nature. I've been an outdoors person my whole life. So I began to spend a lot of time in the woods, on long walks, on hikes. And my first trip was to Australia and New Zealand in the December of the year that Marty passed away, in July of 17. And I called it my resiliency tour because I knew that if I could get myself back out into the world, put myself in a place where I didn't know anyone, where I'd never been before, I could recapture or re-tap into the resiliency that I knew was in me. So that was really important. I would say that part of the grief work that I did with Carol was dealing with past losses that I had not really embraced or addressed or processed, is another word. So I was also shedding and embracing old losses from previous, experiences, even back to my childhood. So there was a lot of very, very deep reflection. I would say in the second year, it was beginning to be about how to move forward and how I wanted to move forward with my life, what it meant to live with an open heart, what it meant to, again, be, a citizen in the world, someone who wanted to make a difference. And that's when I started my journal. And it was about that time, toward I would say, the end of the first year, when I began to write and, ask myself questions and answer those questions and formulate my thoughts and write them down, and all the challenges that I was experiencing. In the second year, I would say there was this beautiful dynamic tension between being sad and also being happy that I had had those 19 years with Marty, feeling the loss and also feeling the joy of being alive again. There was a really poignant moment in New Zealand when I was walking the beach at Greymouth on the South Island. And I walked the beach for, I don't know, I guess 3 days. And midway somewhere on those 3 days, I began to hear what was happening around me. The beach there, pounds the rock into disc-shaped rocks. And when the waves come in and then go out, those rocks chatter against each other. Well, it took me, 6 months and 2 days walking that beach before my mind could be quiet enough and my spirit could be calm enough, and I was able to hear those rocks chatter, hear those rocks sing. And my hope is that, my fellow grievers will reach a point in their grief process when their mind and their spirit are calm and soothed enough so that they can be, able to hear those kinds of those things in nature and be once again still in love with life.
Super profound, and it just naturally leads into what was going to be my next question, which was, you know, the first part of it was, when did the idea to write something come to mind? And then the second part was going to be, and how did you come up with the title of the book? So I don't know. If you're a mind reader, you're really good at it. But I do want to say, like, that's exactly where I was going. And so, as far as naming the book, When the Rocks Sing, you got to tell us a little bit more about how you came up with that title, because it sounds like it's your title, right?
It's my title. Yeah. And the purpose of the book from the very beginning was, well, let me back up. The purpose of the journal was to keep my flow of thoughts and my feelings, keep them flowing. And they flowed right out into the pages of my journal. And I wrote a lot. I would say beginning in that second year, I began to write a lot about my experiences and, my own reflections on those experiences. And after I had gone to New Zealand and experienced that extraordinary moment on the beach when my my whole person was calm enough and still enough so that I could actually listen to nature again, I really wanted to do something for other people who have experienced this kind of loss. I felt a sense of, I wouldn't say responsibility, but a desire to share some of what I had learned through working with Carol, to share the experiences of finding resilience within myself to keep moving forward and to face those really tough moments when you're not sure you can. And what it's like to work with a grief counselor, to walk with you on that journey, which she did with me, and allow me to bare my soul, allow me to just be myself in a situation and an environment where there was no judgment, but complete acceptance and understanding and helpful questions to continue to search, for my own answers and my own perspective. And there were, many, many topics that we covered in those 2 years. So the book began to grow out of my journal and began to take shape as these 20 chapters, these topics that I wanted to share. And what Carol and I felt was that I was learning a lot about what it means to grieve and find resiliency to go forward and again stay in love with life, that there were things to share. It was I think in the summer of 2020 when I was fairly well complete, in my writing of the book. It was fairly well done. It had been through some pretty significant edits. And I realized that I wasn't I wasn't the right person to give anyone advice. I can share my story, my insights, the things I've learned, but I really wanted all those wonderful pieces of wisdom and insight from Carol to be joined with my story. So I invited her to write, from a counselor's perspective at the end of every chapter, what she thought, how she interpreted what I was experiencing, some clinical insights and some suggestions for those who may be experiencing similar things through the grief process. And happily, she said yes.
It's a cool collaboration. It's super unique. It's something that I don't know if has ever been done before. And I just greatly look forward to reading more of When the Rocks Sing. I know that at least from what you've shared, it sounds like part of the story, for lack of a better word, in the book involves your path to and being, I don't know the right terminology, but I'm going to say path to resiliency for you, as a grieving spouse and as someone who found ways to move forward in life. And for you, Marv, what qualities stand out as far as, if you, hindsight being 2020, and if you look back and you're able to connect the dots, what is this path to your personal resiliency?
That starts with embracing the impermanence of life and accepting that all things alive live in a constant state of impermanence. And I found that accepting that, as Marty and I both did accept that, gave me, I guess, a head start on accepting what was happening to us during her cancer experience and accepting her loss. It didn't mitigate the sadness. I still felt it as intensely as I could ever imagine, but it gave me a frame of mind and a frame of reference that, it helped me accept my own mortality. In a prior life, in my 20s, I was a Methodist minister, and I conducted about 130 funerals. I guess I just had an affinity for that. And experiencing other people's grief and observing it was very informative for me. The other thing I would say is that working with someone like Carol to walk that journey with me was essential for me to be able to find those ways to tap into my resiliency, because I searched for that in our counseling relationship. I searched for ways to build my own resiliency, and she helped me do that. The answers were within myself, and she helped me tap into those answers. Being in nature was extremely important to me to refine my center and my own resilience, my own sense of I'm part of the world. As Marty once said, this is the universe that's going to give me more life. And I live with that sense that life is a gift. I'd say the other thing that I probably should add is that I live with a strong sense of gratitude for life, for the love that I experience, and for every day. So, say those are the things that really help me rebuild and tap into the resiliency that I think is within all of us.
That's absolutely beautiful. I love hearing more about your process. I love hearing more about your journey. It's just as I don't know, I'm just in awe of it. And everyone listening, by the way, if you ever get the chance to go to New Zealand, please go. I've been to Grey Muth myself, and I actually think I swam with dolphins in that area. And it's just an amazing place. The whole South Island of New Zealand is unlike no other place in the world. It's that incredible, and does open up a lot of quote unquote doors, as a metaphor, to healing, whatever it is one may be trying to seek healing for. So I'm glad New Zealand found you in your recognition that you needed to travel to help you return to life and move forward. I tell you what, Marv, one last question. So tell us where we get this book.
It was published by Ballast Books, Ballast. If you go to the Ballast Books website and type in When the Rocks Sing, or you type in my name, it will come up, and you can order it directly from the publisher. Or if you prefer to buy it on Amazon or from Barnes & Noble or any of your other favorite booksellers.
Fantastic. We'll definitely communicate that in the messaging that we put out in social media and also what we share on the podcast page. But that actually was my second to last question. For you, Marv, I guess where you're at now, is it fair? It's fair to say that you still have some moments when grief does hit, right?
Yes.
Okay. And so knowing that you feel like you have gotten to a point throughout a grief process and you are exactly where you're at, what are some of the things you tell yourself when some of that grief hits you?
Well, I tell myself it's a way of honoring the relationship that Marty and I had. It's a way of honoring the love that we had. My experience of grief is that it's in direct proportion to the amount of love that was there between you and, in my case, my spouse. And it's a way of honoring myself and allowing my own spirit to accept and express itself when it needs to. My sense of when those feelings come is that my whole person wants and needs to express that feeling. And so I embrace it and I honor it.
Yeah, thank you. Well, I tell you what, we're going to wrap up there. Marv, this has been a wonderful conversation, just a truly unique and amazing experience. And I wish you all the best. I can't wait to hear, from all the people who have felt lost in losing a spouse and lost in losing, a significant other that they've had a deep and soulful connection with. I greatly look forward to the messages of gratitude that you receive and them reading the book and sharing more about, how it helped them. I wish you all the best, and thank you so much for being a part of Grief Refuge.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for listening to the full interview. I'm deeply grateful for your trust in Grief Refuge and all the stories and the experiences shared here on this podcast. Grieving and healing, it's important work. And although it's painful at times, it's so worth it to help heal your heart, your mind, and your soul. Remember that if you need more support right now, download the Grief Refuge app. It's such a helpful tool that has daily content to comfort and support you throughout this difficult journey. So open up your phone's app store and search Grief Refuge, and that's where you can find and download the app. Also, would you leave a rating and review, please? Your feedback is deeply valued, and it's listened to. We want this Grief Refuge podcast to best serve your needs. And the more you let us know, the better we can provide. So please rate and review the Grief Refuge podcast on your favorite podcast player. Thank you. Take care. Keep honoring your grief. Keep listening to your heart. Be kind to yourself, and talk to you soon.